Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's just after 12 noon on Thursday, the 25th of March. My name is Mark Harris, and I am your moderator for today's webinar. This is the third in a series of 4 sessions in which we're looking at precisely what the new normal means for travel managers, intermediaries, and suppliers in the eyes and minds of some of the biggest and best brains in the business. Today's topic is customer engagement in a post-COVID world, and it's brought to you by TIN in association with International Hospitality Media and supported by the Business Travel Association. Very shortly, we're going to be looking at why, as business travel returns, it's never been more important to provide travellers with the content and information they need. Furlough and downsizing will mean building new relationships and rebuilding old ones. So how will all of these factors change the way customers and suppliers engage? But before that, let me just take a couple of minutes to draw your attention to a few items. Our colleagues at IHM will be hosting a drinks evening on the 7th of July for travel buyers at Tobacco Dock in London. I don't know about you, but I can't wait to actually see people face to face again. And this is a super opportunity. It's part of our Engage programme for travel managers and has been compiled by them, accommodation and urban living innovators. You'll be very, very welcome, and you can find details of how to book on the IHM website. Now, these events could not take place without the support of our sponsors, and they are all shown on your screen now. Finally, if you like what you see today and hear, at Travel Intelligence Network, we now offer a full or menu-driven service to create webinars for suppliers and intermediaries. In fact, we provide content of all kinds, from blogs to podcasts, white papers to sector reports. And the service is fast, accurate, and informed. So if you'd like to refresh your brand's marketing with some compelling content that drives sales inquiries, please get in touch. Now, before our drinks evening on the 7th of July, IHM are running a series of virtual events, again as part of the Urban Living Festival. Full details are on your screen now. Now to some housekeeping protocols for this webinar. To really make this interactive, we need you to use the chat and Q&A functions on your screens. You can send in questions and observations to our panel. Now, these sessions work best when questions are asked as we go, so don't wait till the end. As soon as you've got a question, hit that chat button or the Q&A function, send your question in, and I'll then put that to our panel members. We do that, we'll have a great session. We'll be monitoring the feedback, your feedback, during the session, but apologies if it takes a little while to get to your question. It'll only mean that our panelists are in fine flow. So without further ado, now is the time for me to invite today's panel to introduce themselves, starting with Deborah.
Thank you, Mark. My name's Deborah Heather. I run a company called Assessment Services. We are what it says on the tin. We're an assessment and accreditation body, completely independent, international, work across various industries, including property, assisted living, further education, and the one we're here to talk about today, hospitality and travel. I'm an ex-hotelier, really passionate about travel and what we should and shouldn't be doing. So really looking forward to this conversation.
Thanks, Deborah. And Chris next, please.
Thanks, Mark. I'm Chris Galanty. I'm the Global CEO of Corporate Travel at the Flight Centre Travel Group. So you'll know us best by our 2 global brands, FCM and Corporate Traveller. And I'm based in London, but lead a team based all around the world.
Thank you, Chris. And Richard.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I'm Richard Eades. I'm the Global Category Manager and Lead for Travel, Meetings and Events for BP, working globally.
Great. Well, welcome to our panelists. Lots of experience there for us to draw upon as we talk about customer engagements in a post-COVID world. Now, just to set the session in context, these are some of the things we're going to be looking at in the course of the next 55 minutes. The pandemic's impact on customer relationships with their suppliers and whether those need to be rebuilt. How travellers' needs have changed since the lockdown, if at all. What travel managers have to learn about duty of care, and do they need to learn anything about duty of care? How suppliers can meet travellers' safety and well-being expectations, and what best practice actually looks like in terms of the traveller experience for travel managers and suppliers going forward. Couple of quotes all on your screen now, and clearly the final one is the most relevant of them all in and around the importance, as we all know, of safety, security and cleanliness. Worth though picking out the middle quote for the quote from the Collinson report. Less than a quarter of UK business travellers are aware that their employers offer medical and security assistance. So they're aware, but they don't know what they include. So there's a communications job to be done. So now let's get into our debate for the next hour. And the first topic we're going to look at is this whole question of, do suppliers need to rebuild their relationships with suppliers and vice versa? And how are they going to do that? Let's start with Richard, please.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I think, yeah, interesting conversation if you're sitting there as the traveller. I think there's obviously multiple channels of loyalty that can happen and build on. I think it's me with my hat on as a corporate buyer, global travel manager, might have a different perspective over that loyalty. I think I was reading a McKinsey report the other day about during COVID, retail has seen a 44% drop on loyalty from their brands, etc. So the impact, obviously, of us operating on a retail basis as a consumer down online channels is obviously different to actually visiting physically and going into shops. So if you put that into perspective of what we're talking about here, is that, you know, there's a lot of hotels and airlines that have had to adapt and change to regulations, but at the same time, you know, with the resource that they've still got, if they've been operating, how do they maintain that relationship when, you know, for example, we're not traveling outside of security measures, so our volumes are less. You know, how do we maintain our partnerships? So in reverse, we're looking at that, but as it comes back into travel, what we're not looking for is a massive sales hit. We're not looking for, we're the cleanest hotel, or we're an airline that's operating to this. You know, it's all about a consultative approach, being, you know, informative, and being actually where and what you are, the purpose. So what are you actually trying to build and deliver with us that we actually need moving forward? Because, you know, without a doubt, we as a corporate, as well as our demand and our volume and our footprint, is going to be different to what it was in end of 2019, beginning of 2020. So perhaps, you know, not only are we, it just happens as we as BP are changing, reimagining energy away from oil and gas. So that's changing our strategy, it's changing, sustainability is high on our agenda. So, you know, we're looking for the supply base that is coming on their journey with us, but not selling to me. So that's probably, in a nutshell, what I'm looking for that loyalty.
Okay, I'll bring Chris in at this point. So, Chris, you obviously have a global remit. So I guess I'm interested not just in your take on this particular question, but the degree to which here in good old Blighty we might be ahead of or behind other countries. Your thoughts, please.
Well, let me start with that bit first. Yes, I mean, what we are seeing globally is a simple mantra that I keep saying is, when people can travel for business, they do travel. And it really is hugely varied around the world. What we've seen over the last year is that as soon as markets get COVID under control, people start traveling. So China domestic business came back pretty quickly, actually. It's almost back to 100%. We're now seeing markets like Australia and New Zealand, now domestic borders have remained open, and there's talk of now Trans-Tasman opening shortly. The business travel's really picked up there. We're seeing it pick up in the States, because I think, you know, the new administration seems to have done a much better job of getting the vaccination happening. So internal business in the States is happening. Blighty is a bit, I mean, we're still in our homes, aren't we? I'm looking at the screen, everyone's still sitting in their houses, so not so much. But I think, you know, obviously businesses have a deep responsibility to their people, so they're only allowing them to travel when it is safe. And obviously that started in domestic, but, you know, we're reasonably confident talking to customers that I think Richard's right, you know, certain businesses will change their travel profiles moving forward, but there does seem to be pent-up demand. In terms of loyalty, look, the quick answer to that is yes, of course you have to maintain loyalty with customers. You do in a normal business cycle, and I think you certainly do during COVID. And I think customers we've remained, and you shouldn't generalize with customers, we have customers with big enterprise global corporations, and we have SMEs. And obviously how you build loyalty is different with different customers. I think the main thing though is, and I'd echo what Richard said, it's not about big sales pitches, it's about being informative, collaborative, providing useful information. People who are responsible for travel within their businesses are constantly being asked by the board, by the CEO, what's happening. And as we know as consumers, let alone industry people, the news is changing every day in every market. It's contradictory often. So being a valuable source of information, I think, is the most useful thing we can do.
So Deborah, to bring you in as a former hotelier, looking at the sector and obviously with your own specific area of expertise, how do you see the relationship between accommodation providers and customers and guests changing as a result of the pandemic?
I think there's something and I was just thinking when Richard was talking about their program and how they're changing it, I think there is something in the way that we start working as suppliers. Almost we have to take on an ethical stance. There's something in responsibility, and I really think that actually the responsible operators will win. I'm sure end users will want that reassurance and that trust, and be able to have a sort of familiarity, so that the brands or the properties or whatever they were using before is going to be important to them in lots of ways. But actually it's that bit where you establish trust and behave ethically. I think people are really going to have to embed that into their cultures and how they look after their teams, and really promote that from the front.
So that ethical approach, I'm going to come to Richard, then to Chris. That ethical approach, is that going to have more currency, not just for you as a travel manager, but also for your travellers?
Yeah, I think, and again, I think where in the past, one of our 5 values is safety. We've never compromised on safety. So, doing risk assessments constantly. We do tabletop exercises over continuity plans, etc. So I think we look for a supply base, and we recognize whether it's hotels or ground transport or airlines that are servicing us, they aren't just providing us assurances within contracts, but actually living and breathing and practicing. So, part of that collaboration that we offer is, to work with our partners to help develop their safety protocols and, ethical alliances. But I think, the difficulty is this is a service industry. It's built around people and experiences, and a lot of the, expectations of those that are traveling, whether it's on leisure or business, is that it's the whole experience. So have I made it simple for me to book to start with, to then the ethical bit is I arrive and I feel safe in future, so how do you do that without imposing too much on my experience in the hotel? So what purpose am I using a hotel? Is it leisure or business? But I still want to have a good experience. I don't want to be regimented into, you can stand there, but you can't go in there. Oh, that room's closed off. And, it all becomes too rigid that actually I might as well have stayed at home. I don't want to travel anymore. So it's a very balanced line, etc. But obviously, we're expecting, and this is the expectation, is that every guest in that hotel, whether it's one of our members of staff to other guests to staff and supply base that are delivering to that property, are all safe. So it's about us all in the future. It's got to be collaborative. We can't start changing our contracts and insisting suppliers that to do things that are impractical or in cost sensitive, etc. It's about us all working together and being, using common sense.
Does that reflect what your customers are telling you, Chris?
Well, I think when we talk about ethical travel, I think travel as an industry tends to contribute to ethical outcomes, because people don't tend to, for leisure or for most business travel, want to travel to places where there isn't rule of law, where there isn't security, where there isn't safety, where people aren't looked after as employees. And so it tends to enforce it. I think that one of the key things we're seeing prior to COVID, and I'm sure it'll be even more so coming out, is sustainability. Talks about practical sustainability. So you can put it on a document, you can put it on your website, but what are you actually doing? And how are you making it easy for customers to have a sustainable travel program? And as TMCs, obviously, we don't encourage businesses to travel. We want to make their travel accountable. We want to deliver an ROI. And every customer I talk to now, we are talking about sustainability. And it's important. And obviously, Richard's business is going for an entire transformation, as he said earlier, but I think it's true for all industries, for all companies, both large corporations and SMEs. And I think the whole industry should be very proud of what it does from an ethical perspective, but has to, put meat on the bones of the sustainability narrative. I think that's going to be a changing outcome coming out of this.
So, Deborah, is there a risk that actually suppliers can use cleanliness ethicality, if there is such a word, and if there isn't, there should be, using that as a sales tool, marketing gimmick?
Well, I think we've seen it, haven't we? There's been clean washing left, right and centre. It used to be greenwashing, talking about the sustainability thing, but actually there's some brands doing some remarkable marketing speak out there that isn't embedded in their product. And I think that's the thing. I think the customers are going to start being more cynical about that. And it's going to have to be through the DNA of the businesses, the operators, have really got to embed this sort of responsible, ethical, sustainable practice within how they operate, and get the staff to live and breathe it. As I said, it's vital, because they've got the well-being of everybody to consider, and it's the way we're moving as an industry.
So just to take that one foot, do you think that suppliers need to ramp down the marketing speak? How do they address that? 'Cause there's a thin line, isn't there?
There is a thin line, and I think there will be an awful lot of cynicism as business travel comes back. I think, I've seen it. One of the biggest hotel brands I stayed at probably last autumn, huge campaign, huge marketing speak about cleanliness, and there I was sat with a remote control that was absolutely filthy, but a little slidey cover over it that said it was sanitized, and that's going to be obvious to the public. That's going to be obvious to any traveller, and therefore they've got to really think about how they embed and stop using this as a marketing tool, but genuinely have it throughout their operations.
So, Richard, within BP, how are your travellers and through your travellers yourselves, how are you going to see through this clean washing? Thank you, clean washing.
Yeah, clean washing. Yeah, with hotels and airlines, the same. I think it's the whole concept, like you say. I think as we evolve and we come back into travel in normal life, I think it's a given. We're going to be in an environment that, as Chris said, would we deliberately go and book ourselves into a dirty hotel or a dirty airline? We wouldn't, would we? So, why try and send me email after email every week saying, we've got these green protocols around. Those are the kind of things that we discuss around the peripherals, and there are listings, but it's about regulation. It's about kind of standard operating procedures which are built. I mean, if you remember, Mark, years ago when we didn't have grey hair, there was hotels that signed contracts with companies to have intranet installed, and we as a consumer were being charged to use internet when we checked into a hotel, £15 a day or £20 a day. I mean, any traveller that went into a hotel and was presented with a bill for £20 to use the internet today would just fall over or start shouting. So I think we're going to be in that same situation. As I go and stay in a hotel, I expect it to be aligned to the regulations of that local authority, but also the standard operating procedures of that hotel group or individual independent owner. So it's a case of, yes, make sure that it's noticeable and clean, and if there's an item that the traveller or the guest needs to contribute to, not financially, but in their bedrooms, we've seen the towels and the washing protocols, or hotels that are moving away from bars of soap and liquid gels and things like that and into alternatives. again, engage the travelers. What do they want, etc. What does the consumer want? Engage. Don't deliver a field of dreams that just nobody's going to come and use, or you're going to actually damage your brand and your experience. So I think there's a lot of work to be done, but just lay off the marketing and the emails into us every week saying how clean you are. It's becoming a bit repetitive now. Yeah.
Chris, can I bring you in at that point? Then I'm going to put the first question we've had from our audience. Chris first, though.
Yeah, I'll just make a quick point, Mark. I think what's going to happen is suppliers, whether they're airlines or hoteliers, are going to be held more accountable to these sorts of promises now. So if you are marketing that you're clean, you don't want to hear Deborah's remote control story. And I remember talking to a customer pre-COVID. I said, I'm meeting a very senior person from an airline tomorrow. I know you travel a lot on this airline. Any feedback? And they said to me, yeah, can you just tell them to clean their planes, please? Because whenever I spend £5,000–6,000 on a ticket, I get on board and it shocks me how dirty the planes are sometimes. That's not going to be acceptable moving forward. So I think living up to the promises, people are going to be holding all suppliers accountable.
Okay, I'm going to come back to that point in just a second, but I want to put to all of you the first question, which is coming from Joe Layton. Morning, Joe, or afternoon. And the question is this: what do the panelists think about the number of new profit-making companies that are popping up in the ethical travel space, i.e. offsetting? And is there a way of checking if the offsetting investments made to these companies is going to be the actual cause of, for instance, and the question then runs out. So let's just pick up on what are the panel's thoughts on these new profit-making companies popping up in the ethical space. Chris, I'll start with you, if I may.
Yeah, look, I think it's great, but they've got, again, let's get back to accountability. I think it's good that companies are popping up and providing easy, usable solutions for companies that do want to offset. And I'm not going to mention any names, but we have some relationships with a couple. And I think it's great. I think if they can provide a great service, look, we have a travel app where it shows how many miles or kilometers I do a year when I travel. I'm one of the biggest travelers in our company. I travel not prior to this constantly. And I'm proud now that it's also going to show, my offsetting that the company contributes for every time I travel, I offset. And, I show that to my kids. I have to travel for work. And I think it's important there are simple solutions for companies and individuals within companies to offset their travel. I think it's great. And I think if any company is misleading about the true contribution, I think that they won't survive. There's too much scrutiny on this. And we certainly do a lot of research before we engage in any relationships. But look, I think it's a great thing. I think, it's back to ethical travel. If I have to travel for work, and many of us do, I want it to be as sustainable as possible.
Can I bring in either Deborah or Richard, whichever one of you wants to come in first?
I was just going to say, back to Chris's point, I agree. I think if they're doing it and they're doing it well, it's amazing, and it's just what we need. I have 2 teenage daughters who were brought up near Totnes. There's an awful lot of pressure from me in terms of how much I travel personally, but I think it's this next generation thing. The industry, the whole idea around travel, be it for leisure or business, is going to be about doing it responsibly, and it feeds into everything we've said already.
Okay, Richard.
Yeah, I think obviously I'm fortunate that I'm in an organisation that has already put his hands up and said, right, we're going carbon neutral commitment, we're sustainability program. We're a big enough company that we have our own internal sustainability carbon team. We've been offsetting our travel for the last 2 years. We developed tools that we used we were a sponsor of the 2012 Olympics, and we've been using a carbon offsetting tool that we operate and is accessible to anybody under the Castrol brand. And we've been using those tools. What we're looking at is obviously our alignment to that global strategy that Bernard Looney has set out, that we are going to be carbon neutral. So how do I move our travel program into that environment that we are utilizing? And this comes down to data, Mark. So the qualified and quantified data. At the moment, I get my data post-travel in a consolidated format from my TMC. We then align that with our internal data and we offset according to that. Now, obviously, as evolution goes, our danger is that we're offsetting at the back end, but some individuals are already choosing to offset at the transaction point if they're not coming through the program. So we're obviously looking at that. We're also developing with our TMC the ability for us to identify and be informed at the point of transaction what our carbon footprint is going to be looking like. Because if we as a company are setting our stall out and saying, we obviously want to follow policy, we want lowest logical fare, etc. But at the same time, is the lowest logical fare the best carbon footprint? So, you know, we can't say that we're going to be committing to the environment and, you know, we attend the Paris agreements and all of that, but at the same time, not practicing what we preach. But we need our supply base to help us develop that. So, you know, those are the areas that are really going to be focused on. So what I am skeptical about, it's the same, you know, whether it's hotels or that, I'm starting to see databases that are providing me a database or, you know, display or a booking tool that shows me this is a sustainable supplier. And when I really start to peel the onion, I'm finding out, well, how does that work? Well, the supplier pays to be on that database. The moment I hear that, then I'm saying, that doesn't seem right to me. You know, so I don't expect the supply base to be paid to be sitting in front of me to have an icon that I'm a sustainable hotel, and the hotel that didn't pay is not listed. So, you know, we've got to look at it as not a revenue generating environment, etc. I appreciate as a customer, as a corporate, as a traveler myself, you know, if it costs a few more dollars within the transaction, I want that honesty and transparency to come through.
So how do we, excuse me, how do we make suppliers accountable for what they say they are going to do? Does that come through associations? I mean, Chris, you're a board director of the BTA. Do we need more regulation? Who'd like to come in with their views on that?
Yeah, look, I think any supplier can claim anything, but suppliers have to live up to what they're claiming in this area. There already was prior to this, but I think coming out of this, I think the world has changed and it is changing. And Deborah talked about her teenagers. I've got teenagers too. Any brand that tries to deceive on this is going to be worthless in the future. And it's just it would be such a crazy business strategy to come out and claim things in this area and not live up to them. That I think society as a whole is going to hold brands to account, whether they're airlines, hotels, it doesn't matter what they are. Legislation, look, legislation typically is local. We're talking about a global business here. So I do think that society as a whole is going to hold, and we as TMCs need to hold our supply chain accountable as well, and customers do too. So I think I see a societal shift here. As I said, I think it was happening before COVID. I think it's going to be even stronger afterwards. And I don't think any brand in any industry, nothing to do with travel, that tries to deceive in this area is going to win.
In the travel sector, before I bring Deborah in the travel sector, we've got a many years history of having a non-joined up approach between countries, whether it be accreditation schemes. Don't we run the risk of heading into exactly the same problem now of having a non-joined up approach to this whole issue? Deborah, your thoughts there, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's an ongoing issue, isn't it? It's fragmented. People choose to do different things in different countries. We've seen it with the clean schemes that have come from either owners, property managers, brands or countries. You know, it's really fragmented. But I think for the sake of people like Richard, when they're looking at what they purchase or what their program looks like, and or anybody traveling for on any basis, we need continuity in terms of how things are applied. We're seeing some traction in that. So obviously our job is as an accreditation body, a third-party accreditation body. And what we're finding now is that schemes like our Safe, Clean and Legal and our Responsible, Ethical, Sustainable Tourism are being taken up in the States equally as much as they are being taken up here. So we're really starting to see some joined up thinking. It has been at property level, but it'd be great to spread that out. So it's both international in terms of governments and in terms of buyers as well.
Do you think we can achieve that, Richard?
Yeah, obviously I'd like to think so. It's not going to be easy, as you say. It's all about collaboration and honesty. I think, we've got to recognise the diversity if we're trying to be global. It might come down to regional areas, but it is about, I think it's about individuals and individual companies, especially the independents, seeing it as an investment and not a cost within the budget. If you're trying to do it for a 12-month period and just say, once we've done it, we've ticked the box, we'll be fine, then it's not going to work. You've got to add that to your budget line as an item line of say, it's the same as learning and development and training. It's an investment in your future. So you've got to do the right thing and get on board. If you don't, as Chris said, you're going to be short-lived, damage your brand. We've seen a huge shift in our recruitment of staff who want to join our company, who perhaps might have not wanted to join our company in oil and gas before, now seeing it as alternative energies, electric vehicles and wind farms and solar, and also a shift in our shareholder investments, in the fact that it's a longer term strategy, but it's investments for the future, for our next generation as well. It's very important.
Chris, what role has trade associations, not necessarily purely the BTA, but obviously that's an organisation close to your heart and they support our these webinars. What role can associations and should associations be playing in this process?
Well, I think, look, we work very closely with all the global suppliers, be it hotel chains, be it airlines, and they all have the same objective. We're all members of society as well as business people. And I think nobody wants a bad outcome here. So I think everyone realizes our industry has work to do. And we work very closely to have a consistent message. I think if we could get more consistent legislation globally, that would be great. But I don't think we should rely on that. I think that just takes too long. It's another excuse to do nothing. I think it's about, as I said, working with supply chains, which industry boards do all around the world. And one thing I will say, which is a slight tangent to your question, but I think this societal change is happening globally. We are not just seeing this in, Western Europe or California. We're seeing this in every market, that this societal change, millennial travelers in particular, are expecting action here. And we're seeing it everywhere. So it is changing. And I think, as I said before, brands that don't change are going to struggle to win in the future.
Okay, thanks, Chris. We've got another question. This one's coming from Mike Stapley. Hi, Mike. And Mike's question is this. A slightly mercenary question, he says, but what do the panelists think will be the impact as regards customer engagement and loyalty in the post-COVID world with regard to price changes, which will happen, increases for additional services or decreases due to increased buyer purchasing power? So what do you think will be the impact in the post-COVID world as far as customer engagement and loyalty is concerned, specifically with regard to potential price rises and increases or decreases in demand for services? Who'd like to pick that one up first?
I'll have a go. Hi, Mike. How are you? An interesting question. I think it's like anything. You've got to start with the supply versus demand, and obviously the multiples of alternatives I might have as a buyer in that location or on that fare route, etc. I think there's going to be diversity in some of the uses that we might have compared to previously. So we're looking very much of our workplace, the hub, club and roam. So will the prices be affected by what type of use are we looking for in our aspect of traveling, not just going to a hotel and stay in a bedroom, but how else will we be using hotels, using apartments, alternative lodging, etc. The same. So I think obviously I'm not anticipating anything on, I heard a call earlier where somebody was anticipating within their company asking us, well, of course, it's going to be cheaper when we get back because hotels will want our business. And I said, no, actually, it's going to be more the other way around. I'm anticipating is that the demand will be very high to start with because everybody wants to get back to collaborating and seeing each other and meeting. So I think, we're anticipating that, and that then comes back to us as we've got our programs, we've got negotiated high volume locations. but there will be suppliers that currently aren't on our preferred program that might come to me being a bit more competitive. So I think it's just a kind of, it's going to be dynamic environment to start with for the next few months. I'm not anticipating doing any RFPs for next year until towards the end of the year, based on I need some data in front of me and actually what's going on. I think if you're thinking you're going to raise your prices just for the sake of it, you'll stick out like a sore thumb. So I think there's lots of discussions to happen, but the data and actual volume that I can bring into the market will make my decisions.
Chris,
And I just, sorry,
I
was just going to say, Mark, I think we've seen that what Richard's just said reflected in the leisure industry. I'm in Devon, and obviously last summer was a bit of a nightmare trying to get around. But actually, when we're talking to operators down here for the coming season, they're rammed and they can charge what they want. And I think that is absolutely reflected in leisure, and therefore we should agree completely with what Richard said.
Okay. Anything to add to that, Chris?
Well, I've spoken to quite a few people in revenue management this year who are scratching their heads in confusion, because a lot of the models they've built up over many years, a lot of them algorithms, none of them work. So it's, as Richard said, it's supply and demand. An interesting example actually was domestic China. So the Chinese government kept all the planes flying. So they kept planes flying and they put very low pricing in on the seats. They got the airlines, as they can in China. Obviously, you can't do that elsewhere for competition laws, but they had cheap pricing and lots of capacity. And that got everyone traveling domestically. And then they've since raised yields and they're back to pre-pandemic levels. So it is supply and demand. It's very difficult for both hotel chains, hotel owners and airlines, because it's expensive to bring supply back. And until you get some certainty from government, particularly on international travel, it's very expensive. So I think pricing is going to be very difficult next 12 months. I think holding off on RFP right now, Richard, is a good idea.
Okay, here's a question, and I'll invite whichever one of you wants to come in first on this. Have travel managers still got plenty to learn about duty of care? And if so, who should be teaching them?
Well, look, I'll start. I think duty of care is a term that's been around forever, hasn't it? And I think prior to COVID, we all as human beings took travel, international travel particularly, for granted. It's become cheaper over the years. It was perceived, for the most part, there are obviously exceptions to this, but for the most part, to be safe, to be simple. The industry's been removing friction continually. You have something like September the 11th where friction comes in, but generally friction's being removed throughout the whole industry. So duty of care was something that people spoke about, they reported on, they had access to information, but we've been doing surveys continually for a year now. It is now, without doubt, for every travel manager, the #1 priority. I'm hearing very few exceptions to that, if any. And I think everyone's got to learn more about duty of care, because we don't actually know what the world's going to be like when it reopens up. Are we going to go back to this seamless travel? Are health passports going to work? Is it going to be digitally enabled? Are we going to see lockdowns come back in again? I mean, we've all got to learn stuff here, and I think we've got to be humble enough to admit we need to. Certainly, we're working very closely with our customers to give as much information as possible, to make it as seamless as possible. But it's going to be a year of learning, and we as an industry need to work together to make that happen. It's not going to be the same, certainly for the short term. Travel will re-emerge, it always does, and will help that happen.
Okay. Richard, Deborah, either of you want to come in on this?
I just would like to, I think there's some interesting murmurings going on around insurance, and I think that will come clearer in terms of how companies are insuring their travellers and what they're expecting, and equally how insurance is working within at a property level or a flight level or all of those things. We may be led a little by that side of the world.
Yeah, I agree with both of you, what you said there. I mean, it is very much everybody is accountable for taking ownership of duty of care, from the individual traveller themselves to obviously the company that is expecting them to travel on business to start with. I can see quite a lot of pressure on an individual when they return to work. If for example, they feel uncomfortable about traveling to start with, there's going to be that emotional environment, pressure from the family, or, you know, we don't want you to go away for a week, etc. So I think, you know, we've got to make sure that the right information is supplied. So, you know, we've got to make sure that there's not conflicting instructions or conflicting information. Is the, you know, we can't keep up with the amount of information that's coming our way, that is changing on a daily basis from a country to country, but also supplier to supplier. So within the booking tool, you know, our pop-up messaging is making sure that the right link. So if you're booking a hotel, instead of the traveler coming to us and saying, oh, what's the advice, we're staying at this hotel, we're actually linking it. What is the hotel's own website saying? What is the government of regulation saying, etc.? So pointing them to the right direction for the, go and get your own information, because if by the time we've sourced it and given you information, it could be out of date. So I think, again, it's making sure that, you know, you're providing this safe environment, but the right information is the only way forward on the duty of care. And as Deborah says, you know, there's insurance, our BP health team are trying to keep up to date. You know, airlines, you know, I've had a few calls with some airlines in the last week that are making it very clear you must have a vaccine, you know, etc. You know, and, you know, there are going to be some individuals that probably just are, you know, even the road warriors that think they know it all, and they arrive at the airport and think, oh, well, I haven't got the right information in front of me. Who are they going to blame? They've got to blame themselves. They can't blame us for, you know, not following the information. So I think it's going to be an interesting return.
Just to echo what Richard said, I think just quickly, the key thing here is contextual information, because a year ago there wasn't enough information. Ironically, now there's too much information. There's information overload. So contextual information, getting the right piece of information into the right person's hands at the right time is what's needed. That's the key.
Thanks, Chris. We've got another question now from Jan Jacobson. Afternoon, Jan. And Jan's question is this: in today's corporate travel ecosystem, how do you propose supply chains are kept accountable for their promises to the travellers, and simultaneously making it a long-term sustainability solution? Who would like to take the first stab at that?
I was just going to say, clearly we'd like to think that was our job, to support the industry and the travel managers and everybody that's purchasing. But it is this bit that we were talking about at the beginning. It's embedding it as part of cultures. So it's much more than just spot checks and somebody going and doing a sort of a self-assessment or a self-certification. It's delving deep into the businesses and how they embed these practices in, so they're doing it on a day-to-day basis.
Richard, you made the point earlier on about the importance of collaboration. Is it collaboration alone? How do you see this?
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's transparency and honesty. I mean, as we said, it's not just, you know, as Jan will know, it's we can go out to RFP, we can put heavy weighting to our evaluations of submissions around things like safety and sustainability, ethical, cleanliness, everything that we're talking about today. But the proof is, you know, obviously, I think most travellers would raise a flag immediately if their experience was not as, you know, they know shouldn't be right. So, yeah, okay, so that's more reactionary rather than preventative. So how do we get into the preventative areas? I mean, we operate in 21 countries that we list as security level higher. So in that aspect, we restrict our display and our booking tools to only properties and suppliers that our local security teams have approved, and they've physically been to those premises and investigated and followed out a procedure, which they do every 6 months. So I think, you know, we have the time, resource and money to be able to do that for a smaller environment, you know, entity. You know, even in countries you perceive as being safe, we regularly have to address issues which, you know, you just wouldn't expect in 2020, the type of issues that we sometimes face, you know. So it's down to bad delivery, bad cleanliness, or safety. But I think, yeah, I mean, it's virtually impossible. We can't be the police or the auditors all the time. So again, it comes down to that trust. And if there's consistency, you know, or, you know, the internet is quite a powerful tool. You know, if there's bad research or bad reviews, you know, people quickly find out about it, and I think this is influencing behaviour.
Okay, Chris, a short comment on this, please.
Yeah, look, I just agree. As I mentioned earlier, I think for brands to not deliver, they will be held accountable by customers, and social media, whether it's the internet, you know, brands can't hide. So if they will be held accountable. And I personally don't think it's about more regulation, more restriction globally. I just think that's a very slow process to accountability. Whereas the public domain now, brands are being held accountable everywhere, not just travel, across all sectors.
Okay, thanks, Chris. I'm going to move the conversation on because we are now approaching our last 15 minutes. And Deborah, I'm going to come to you with this, particularly from your accreditation business's perspective. Are accommodation providers ready for business travel to return? If not, why not? And where are the deficiencies?
Some, the simple answer is some are and some aren't. But I think it's people recognizing that actually their operations have to fundamentally change. So when we wrote Safe, Clean and Legal 2018, we didn't have a pandemic in mind. We had the sharing economy in mind, and we were thinking about that whole difference between a domestic clean and a professional clean, and shifting that market and trying to get people to behave properly and realize when they take cash from people, they need to be compliant. I think business travel is obviously a step way ahead of that. But it's this piece that's missing, that where people have not recognised they have to fundamentally change their strategy. Going back to what Richard was talking about the strategy for BP and how they're changing. I mean, equally like us, where we're sort of working towards B Corporation status, it's this embedding of principles within your business. And there is a big chunk of people that are still sitting there thinking that they can work on the edge of compliance, and compliance is actually the very tiny part of where they need to be going forward.
And Chris, within your sort of supply management teams, what's the take there in terms of the state of readiness? And I'm referencing accommodation providers in reflection of the audience we have on today's webinar.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I have to say it's market by market dependent. So in markets where it's stop-start, where, you know, things are due to open and suddenly we go back into some sort of curfew or lockdown, it's been very difficult, because particularly depending on what levels of government support are out there financially. What we are seeing in markets that have opened up, I think the supply chain's done a great job, actually. I think they are complying, they realize they need to. But we are seeing some difficulties, and you know, I'm not going to mention names, obviously, but in some cities, and it's difficult. You're planning to open up, particularly big hotels. It takes time to get everything ready. You don't just flick a switch and come in the next day. And we're seeing it in the UK. So prime example is, you know, we're waiting for now. It was going to be April the 12th. It's now April the 6th. Let's see what happens. But there is a lead time to get everything ready. So I do sympathise, actually, but I think we're working very closely with our supply chain. And I think genuinely, I get the impression people are doing their best, but they're working under very tough situation in some markets.
Richard?
Yeah, I think there's some good points from both Deborah and Chris on that, and it's part of, you know, the way I've been looking at this for the last 12 months is, you know, they're kind of separating what those risk factors are. And I think, as you say, are they ready? I think that comes down to the individual property, even under individuals under global brands. I think it's down to, you know, areas that we've seen. So what is the financial stability still? I've had quite a lot of suppliers that have put their hands up and, you know, haven't been in a financial position that they can sustain. You know, there's been furlough, there's been huge redundancies. We've lost some excellent people out of our industry. Will they come back? That's the question. Or, you know, have they been successful in securing other roles since? So, you know, we talked earlier about we're anticipating a spike from leisure and corporate, that the demand is going to be there in a lot of locations. Are they going to be ready to fulfill that? And getting people back from furlough, getting the right people trained, but also in the right mindset. If you think about, we're all sitting here at home, you know, we've probably been getting up, you know, 7, 8, 9 o'clock, whatever it feels like, you know, we're dressed a lot more casual. So if you've got a younger generation of waiting staff, reception staff, you know, they've been working at home or doing other things rather than their normal employment. Suddenly they've got to go on to a 2 to 3 shift a day pattern in a hotel. That's going to put some pressure on making sure that they are fulfilling the expectation of the customer, and also then comes back to their health and well-being. You know, it's a bit like you're a member of a gym and you don't go for a year and suddenly you've got to go back to the gym. Are you fit enough to start where you left? So it's mind as well as body. You know, are the staff, you know, and I think there's going to be some interesting, you know, think about the large convention, the guys that are delivering the large events. You know, they rely on a pool of third-party staff coming in from agencies. You know, where's that pool? I've heard there's, you know, in the UK and London, there's a lot of staff that have returned home to mainland Europe to be back with their families rather than sit in one-bedroom apartments in London for the last 12 months. So is there a pool of staff experienced enough to deliver the banqueting for 1,000 in Grosvenor House, for example? You know, there's lots of questions that I don't know sitting in my seat, but it's also about, I've been looking at the larger events that we do that are coming back onto the rotation. We're worried about some deposit schedules that are coming through. Are those suppliers, you know, wanting deposits 6 to 12 months out of quite substantial amounts? Is our money safe sitting in a deposit in some of these smaller agencies, etc.? So again, we're keeping a very close eye on some of our terms and our deposit schedules around that.
So if I was to ask each of you for, let's say, 3 things that the accommodation providers on this call today must have in place, could be 1, 2 or 3, what would you say are the absolute must-haves, the fundamentals? And I'll take anyone to come in first.
I think from our perspective, it's access to information, digitally particularly, because I know that, you know, I don't underestimate how hard it's been running an accommodation provider. It's been difficult enough running a TMC, so I don't underestimate how it's been. So being able to give us the information of the current state of their property, what position it's in, what new features they have, in a way that we can distribute it and communicate it to customers, that's really what we need. And what we're seeing at the moment is quite varied between suppliers and properties. So that's one really important thing for us.
Okay. Deborah, what would you be saying is on the, and again, no doubt from an accreditation perspective, or generally, what are the must-haves from an accommodation provider perspective?
I think Chris is right. Actually, it's clear, simple information that's easy, it's succinct, and it's easy to follow about what they've done, what they're doing to protect and create that trust. I think for me, it's that bit that, and actually having that obviously embedded within their culture. Okay.
And Richard, widening partly on that question, but widening this out to the broader topic of what will best practice in traveller engagement look like post-COVID? Your take on this, please.
Yeah, I think it comes back to the fundamentals of doing business and keeping it simple. Is trust, as well as keeping you know, the innovation going. You know, so you know, as I said earlier, really focus on, as Chris said, information, but make it relevant and make it live. You know, so it's keep it updated, but also, you know, as I said, I think our industry evolves around service, and service, it comes from the people. So focus on your staff, on the development of your staff, but also the retention of the staff. You know, and you know, let's attract the people that we need back into the industry, because we've got a big gap at the moment that needs filling, and I think it's being realistic and trust, being open, honest, etc. You know, try and be a master of trade and a jack of not everything. Yeah. So yeah, work with us.
Just on that point, back to Deborah. I mean, Deborah, do you believe hotels and accommodation providers generally have enough staff to deliver the level of cleanliness that the consumer now demands?
I mean, it goes back to what we were just talking about, doesn't it? It's that pressure commercially that they've had on them in the last 12 months. And I would suspect they've got a real job to do in terms of of making sure they've got the right teams and with the right skill sets, but also having won those hearts and minds. So right now, I would suggest probably not. But I think that's something they really, really need to focus on. It's that shifting, going back to what I was saying before, between domestic and professional, and actually getting people to understand the gap and why, and actually, if you can get that message to your teams, that it will give them enormous support in their own well-being, because obviously they're still fearful of what's going on outside and what may be brought into the property. So for me, focus on your staff as well as that key messaging that you deliver to your customers.
Okay. As by way of a sort of question to bring all this together, in a minute I'm going to ask each of you for your hopes and fears for the next 12 months. Yeah, again, in relation to all the things we've spoken about today. And then I'm going to ask you my favorite Emperor of the Universe question. You are each now the Emperor of the Universe. You can change one thing about this market, one thing only. What would you change? And I'm going to start with Richard.
Oh, yeah, what would I change? I don't know. I mean, I've 35 years in the industry and I've seen a huge amount of change. And I think that probably one thing is, 100% behind digitalization and bringing technology in to make things simpler. But don't forget that it is a service industry. So I think that's one of the things, is making sure that the technology is there as the facilitator, not the driver and the controller. Make sure you've got, so it's not so much a change, it's just an ask. Make sure that we don't forget this built around people.
And your hopes and fears for the next 12 months?
Hopes and fears is probably what it is today. It's too much work, too many sales emails that come through to my inbox every day. So get rid of those. Yeah.
Okay, Deborah.
Collaboration, and that kind of feeds into my hopes and fears as well. It's this whole let's stop the fragmentation, let's build the collaboration, and I feel like that fits with responsible practice as well. So getting the industry working together and almost forcing each other up that whole scale in terms of quality of delivery and everything else, because we're reliant on one another and we're working together.
Chris.
Well, fear that I'll still be on Zoom on a Thursday afternoon in a few months' time. I've had enough. I've got Zoom fatigue. It's a term now, isn't it? So look, but I am optimistic actually about, I think we have to give credit where credit's due. We're in the UK. I think the government, whatever stumbles it had, and I'm not getting into politics here, but I think what they've done with the vaccination rollout is admirable. I think there is a sense of optimism that, the light is definitely at the end of the tunnel. We are on the way out, and I'm optimistic, having seen what's happening in other countries. We will emerge from this. If I could change anything, look, what I've been spending a lot of time on the last couple of weeks, actually, so it's top of my mind, is sustainability, is making it a real thing, is making changes. So that's certainly top of my mind at the moment. If I could change anything, it's embedding it in the entire culture of the industry. That's what I'd change.
Okay. Well, at that junction, sadly, ladies and gentlemen, we are now out of time. All that remains is for me to thank three superb panelists. Thanks to Deborah, thanks to Chris, thanks to Richard for all your time. Just before we go, a couple of commercials. This is the third in a series of 4. The final webinar in this current series takes place on Thursday, the 8th of April, fortnight today. The title is Out of Adversity, and it's all in and around the likely innovation that will come out of the panic. So please make sure you register for that. Once again, I'd just like to thank the sponsors for the Urban Living Festival. Some fantastic brands backing this event. If you haven't already got the Urban Living Festival in your diaries, please don't miss it. We're also delighted to have a number of excellent media partners also shown on your screen. Finally, if you want to get involved as a brand with the Urban Living Festival, please contact Katie. Her details are there. We'd love to have you involved. My hour is now up. Thank you again for all your attention today. I hope you've enjoyed it. And this is Mark Harris signing off. Have a good day. Thanks.